Music is a powerful tool in almost any medium of entertainment. One can often find that the quality of a work can be directly correlated with its use of music. Unsuitable music for specific scenes in a movie can create an unintentionally humorous effect. While a suitable choice will grant an appropriate range of emotions in the piece.
A little fight in you. I like that.
Given this, one may think that it's an odd choice that a video entitled The Narrative Throughline of Music in Video Games would mainly focus on Dark Souls, a game whose main acknowledgement in the mainstream is that you die a lot and it's only for hardcore gamers, not music lovers. However, while I will save the first part of that myth for another day, this video will be focusing on the second, because ignoring the immense quality of the music in this game, let alone game developer studio From Software's library, is a massive disservice to it, as this game is a masterclass in creating a narrative in music when relating to a piece of art, especially considering that the closest thing to lyrics in the music is a few choral vowels, usually an ah. That said, the songs we'll be looking at are specific to moments of the game that are very important to both the lore and the main plot. However, boiling down a lore roughly the size and ambiguity of the Greek mythos is no easy feat, given that there are approximately 5 different races in the story, all playing key roles with one another, and a storyline for each, not to mention the individual stories taking place within those races, centering on individuals, totaling at roughly 30 different stories at once that the game simply refuses to tell you outright, not to mention the actual plot of the main character, who has no voice or obviously defined personality, and of course the game won't tell you that either because this is Dark Souls, so nothing comes without effort, not even the main plot. So with that little rant aside, I'll be covering 5 of the most important songs, while comparing their effectiveness to other songs in video games that attempt a similar effect to these pieces, each in their own segment. Naturally, since I will be talking about the plot and specific important boss battles, there will be spoilers. Not that many here will care too much. Sorry about that. So with that, let us begin. To begin, why don't we start with the piece entitled Prologue, written by Motoi Sakuraba, who penned all of these tracks and more. The track is played during the intro cinematic of the game, in which an unknown old lady tells us the lore of the creation of the world and its main rules. Time for some nerd stuff. In summary, there was once an age called the Age of Ancients, in which nothing lived or changed except for everlasting stone dragons and towering arch trees. Then, suddenly, deep beneath the earth, a fire came into existence, bringing with it disparity and change. This created heat and cold, life and death, and light and dark. Then, a horde of unknown creatures came to the fire, and 4 of them received very large and powerful souls, called Lord Souls. 3 of these were Nito, first and master of the dead, the Witch of Izalith, the creator and purveyor of life in all forms, and Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight and Lightning, who fancied himself a god of light. The 4th, the Furtive Pygmy, went on to father humanity and received the dark soul from the fire, passing it on to his new race. Eventually, all of these beings, humanity included, fought a war against the dragons and ended up victorious. This brought in the Age of Fire, and the Lords, now calling themselves gods, prospered in this age, but all fires must fade. Eventually, to stop an Age of Dark from coming into existence, Gwyn sacrificed himself to the first flame in order to fuel it, artificially lengthening the Age of Fire. In the process, however, he created the Undead Curse, which afflicted mankind and would cause them to never truly die, instead dying over and over again until they lost their entire soul, becoming a hollow or zombie. This is all explained in the cutscene very tidily, but what is truly admirable here is the music. You've actually been hearing the track play throughout this segment, and the funny thing is how well it fits. The beginning of the track, during the Age of Ancients in the cinematic, is very plain and sinister, with only a few plucks here and there on a violin. Then, as we get closer to the first flame, it builds ever so slightly until a choir begins singing and we hit a major crescendo when we see the flame. The eerie undertones of the song reflect on the sinister future this flame will have. along with the alien feeling the Age of Ancients has to our ever-changing worldview. This incites an uncomfortable feeling in the audience, while also helping them understand what the Age of Ancients really means. It also shows us the awesome power of the Lords and the threat they possess to the character, even though we don't yet know these will be our main opponents in the second half of the game. The music then hits a warlike, chanting theme as we head into the war with the dragons, once again filling us with awe as we hit even higher crescendos until we hear the Age of Fire and the end of the war. As we continue to watch, we continue to hear the music drop out of its grandeur, and we are instead treated to more unnerving tones, as the music tells the audience, using its minor key and low, quiet tones, that what we are hearing is something to be feared. The track then ends, with us then being treated to the game proper, and so a wonderful track is born. It perfectly reflects what the narrator tells us, and fills us with a great deal more emotion than we would expect. Speaking of emotion, let's talk about the feeling of home. This track is called Firelink Shrine, and plays in the main hub area of the game, Firelink Shrine. Up until this point, you've only been treated with a terrifying demon, several zombies, called Hollows, and a very stressful track, as well as a crow taking you for a ride to a new kingdom to the south, called Lordran. This area is a change of pace, and one of the few truly safe areas in the game. Here, nothing will harm you, and the music reflects that. The piece is simple, consisting only of a couple instruments, namely the discernible violin and piano, perhaps with some soothing cello, and evokes a sense of home. This track feels safe, and makes this area unique, as very few areas actually have music outside of boss battles. The way it does this is through a combination of a major key, a few instruments, and long-held notes. The song itself is actually only 40 bars long, and doesn't even take up a full sheet of paper. However, those 40 bars elicit such a strong sense of security and respite that the repetition isn't even all that noticeable, something extremely useful in a video game, where a player may spend any given amount of time in a single area. The song is actually quite similar to other songs in gaming found in healing areas, such as Great Fairy Fountain in Ocarina of Time, or Pokémon Center from Pokémon. The song is extremely important from a personal perspective, as such a safe, warm song is a welcome change of pace in a world that wants you dead at every turn, and where even the tutorial boss is a 30-foot tall demon with a giant hammer. Speaking of demons, it's time to leave that safety behind and face your first real challenge. The track Bell Gargoyles is played during the boss battle with the first major boss of the game, the Bell Gargoyles. Up to this point, you've only ever had to deal with grounded opponents, with the occasional environmental hazard, like the Hellkite Drake. The only bosses that you've likely faced are the Asylum Demon, the Taurus Demon, and possibly Pinwheel, all of whom are fairly easy to beat, but not necessarily easy to get to. This, however, is the first significant boss you will face. The Bell Gargoyles guard the first Bell of Awakening that our character must find in order to continue their quest, the second being below in Blighttown. The track stresses the player out through its use of quick, high-pitched violin and pounding timpani, all while a choir overscores the song at several points, which, in concert with the brass section and harp, give an almost legendary feel to the song. A similar effect is achieved in many other tracks in video games, most famously in the Legend of Zelda franchise, in which nearly all of its boss tracks seek the same effect, using similar methods. A specific example, however, would be the Possessed Zelda track. It gives an impression of an imposing, legendary creature which threatens to block your path as long as you allow. The string section goes into a feverish frenzy at the 2-minute 9-second mark for around 7 seconds, and uses sounds similar to those of a horror movie. The song is displaying not only what the character feels about these creatures, having likely heard about them their entire life, but only in myth and legend, and now coming into conflict with them, but also the true nature of these beasts, being divine emissaries of the gods of Lordran, but still monsters nonetheless. This is a common theme throughout the music of the game, as which tracks play in which fights will often tell you the relationships between certain bosses. For example, the song played during the Moonlight Butterfly fight is also played during the Gwyndolin fight. The butterfly appears in another area of the game, specifically the birthplace of this world's sorcery, the Crystal Cavern. This links Gwyndolin to the master of this area, Seath the Scaleless, likely as a student of Seath's, while also betraying how the butterflies came into being, namely, as a likely creation and servant of Seath and Gwyndolin. In Dark Souls, music betrays the truth in a world that refuses to give you any without work, and the Bell Gargoyle betrays the gargoyle's true horror and awesome origins. Speaking of truth, perhaps we should talk about the opposite. When I began this project, I had 2 tracks that I couldn't wait to talk about in the game. Those tracks were the final track and this track, titled Ornstein and Smough, which plays during, you guessed it, the Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smough boss fight. Are you noticing a trend? This will likely take up the most time, although each of these songs could be analyzed in depth for at least an hour. At any rate, this boss fight is legendary on multiple levels. On a meta level, the fight is considered one of the hardest and best crafted in gaming history, the former of which I respectfully disagree with. However, on an in-game level, this fight and song mean so much more than people give it credit for. The opponents of the fight are living legends, near gods in their own right, with Ornstein being one of the most prominent warriors during the War of Ancients, and Smough being just short of his companion's rank due to his brutality and gluttony for human flesh ground up into his food. How lovely. Despite this, these two are both well regarded and powerful, and stand in your way of lighting the first flame, and this is reflected in their song. The song is grand and heroic, with soaring notes and a very noticeable harp. However, the song also has a pounding timpani and organ section, with some sinister notes thrown in, and a low male choir during these sections, reflecting the terrifying and brutal nature of Smough. However, one more layer is added to this song that many may not notice on first listen. Perhaps if I play this song, or this song, or this song, you'll begin to notice it. These songs are very different, and ONS is also distinct from these, but it does have several similarities in tone, power, and grandeur. It sounds a little bit like Sakuraba looked at these songs' cliff notes and decided to write a song from them, creating this witch's brew of a song, which made me think it sounded a little like an imitation of these songs. The reason I felt this way is because it was likely the intent. While the player is unaware of this at the time of the fight, the whole of Erno Orlando is an illusion, including all of the gods stationed there but one. The truth betrayed by this song is that these two are imitations of themselves, but still create that grand impression on the audience. They and everything else you see is false, with the music cueing you into this, subtly hinting at the truth of this world. But this is not the last time a track will do this. It isn't even the strongest moment of lore exposition through music. Buckle up for the final showdown at the kiln of the first flame. Our final track, and the track you are currently listening to, is called Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, and there should be a few things sticking out immediately. First, the song is played simply on piano alone, rather than the grand, orchestral music of every other case of the music in this game, with the exception of Firelink. Secondly, this song is very repetitive. Third, it sounds extremely sad for a final boss track. Shouldn't it hype you up for the final confrontation? Mostly, but we'll get to that. Before we can understand what this piece is telling us, we need to know the context and what the piece is making us feel. To know that, we need to look at the fight, Gwyn's design, and the construction of the song. The fight is actually fairly easy, being made easier by the fact that this is the only boss that can be parried, which allows for absurd damage in a single strike. This feels off, as he is still trying to kill you, but he moves very predictably and slowly when compared to his peers, almost like a hollow. Then we notice his design, and notice that he is a hollow, which seems odd. He's a god, a lord, not undead or even human. So how is this possible? In due time, the song will teach us. Full disclosure, the upcoming theory of this particular segment is very heavily inspired by a YouTuber named 8-Bit Music Theory and his video on Gwyn's theme. This is all my own content, it's just that I was very much inspired by him because he's very smart. The song is constructed via two sets of motifs, those being EDA, or a 5-4-1 chord, and EFG, or a 5-6-7 chord. These motifs repeat and twist in various ways, but they almost always descend the scale. The song is slower than most and has no sense of grandeur, making it feel off from every other song in the OST. It also is constructed of 3 sections, each reflecting a part of this god's story. It tells us through his appearance, his sacrifice to the flame, previously explained, and this sad, repetitive song, his entire story. The song tells us the tone of the story while letting everything else do the rest of the talking, and reflects on why what the story tells us is so tragic. Gwyn was so terrified of the coming age of dark, where humans would prosper and the gods would be left behind, that he burned his soul at the first flame to stop it. In the process, he began to lose his soul, as it burned away like gas in a car or oil in a lamp. This is what sparked the undead curse, with Gwyn being the first to experience hollowing. Burning to death and returning to life for 1,000 years would naturally erode his soul before anyone else's. However, his intentions lingered on, and even in this sorry state of a lord being brought down to a level lower than human or animal, he still fears the dark and will protect the flame at any cost. He has no mind or soul, only mild power of lightning and fire and a withering corpse of a body, and yet his desperation allows him to remain. This is a song that tells us exactly what his sad fate is, and how he would feel about it if he could feel any more. Instead, Sakuraba asks us to feel for him in his place, and put down the withered sun like an old dog in pain, too stubborn to die in his sleep. A similar effect is achieved in Halo Reach during the final mission, in which a lone soldier is left on a hostile alien planet with the only goal of surviving as long as possible. It's a forced loss mission that results in the soldier's death, and the track that plays is similarly mournful and sad, with a similar use of motif repetition. But unlike Halo, Dark Souls' use of repetitive motifs actually means something. Whether or not you light the first flame, the Age of Fire continues in the story, whether by your hand or another's. The song has slight twists on its motifs throughout the piece, which reflect each new Age of Fire, and how they are, while subtly different, ultimately the same story played indefinitely, or until the flame dies completely, unable to be relit at all, an ending we see in Dark Souls 3. The story is tragically cyclical, and Gwyn is likely to blame. After all, he was the god of this world, and he feared the dark enough to die by fire to avoid it. If that was his attitude, why would his generations of followers believe any differently? He encouraged his followers to do as he did and burn their souls forever, unless someone finally comes along and convinces the world to abandon the fire and turn to dark. The narrative of Dark Souls is muddy, complicated, and requires a lot of digging to even find the basics, much like our own world. However, the use of music in the game is varied, and allows us to begin understanding what each story is. Whether it be demons betraying their own kind to the gods, or the gods being shadows of themselves, sometimes literally, or even a single safe space in a harsh and cruel world, the music in this game is used to astonishing aptitude to explore the lore and stories within the game. Something that many other games have found a way to do as well. Many simply use music to instill an emotion rather than tell a story, but Dark Souls does both, and does so exceptionally well.